The testament of truth. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was making breakfast for Caleb. The sound cut through our small apartment in Savannah like a blade, sharp and urgent in a way that made my hands tremble as I reached for it. 10 years of peace were about to shatter with that single call. Miss Rachel Moore? The voice was formal, measured, belonging to someone who dealt in serious matters. Yes, this is Rachel. My name is Thomas Dawson. I was your father's attorney. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. William Moore passed away 3 days ago. The spatula slipped from my hand, clattering against the kitchen floor. Caleb looked up from his cereal, those intelligent brown eyes immediately alert to the change in atmosphere. He had always been sensitive to my moods, my 10-year-old protector who had learned too early to read the signs of trouble. I see, I managed, though I wasn't sure I saw anything clearly. My father was dead. The man who had cast me out of his life, who had chosen to believe lies over his own daughter, was gone. Miss Moore, I need you to understand something very important. Your presence, along with your son's, is required at the reading of your father's will. This is not a request or an invitation. According to the terms of his final, irrevocable testament, if you and the boy are not present, the entire will becomes null and void. The estate would then be handled according to a secondary arrangement that would be highly disadvantageous to all parties involved. I sank into the kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Mr. Dawson, I haven't spoken to my family in 10 years. They made it very clear that I was no longer welcome. I understand the circumstances, Miss Moore. Your father was quite specific about the events that led to your estrangement. However, his final wishes are equally specific. The reading is scheduled for this Friday at 2 o'clock at the family home in Charleston. I strongly advise you not to miss it. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Caleb had finished his breakfast and was watching me with those two wise eyes. Mom, are we going somewhere? I looked at my son, this beautiful boy who had never known his grandfather, who had grown up hearing only whispers about the family that had rejected us both. How could I explain that the man who had never acknowledged his existence was now summoning us from beyond the grave? We might need to take a trip, sweetheart, to Charleston. His face lit up with curiosity rather than fear. Caleb had inherited my stubborn streak along with my dark hair, but thankfully, he had missed out on the deep-seated need for approval that had nearly destroyed me. The next 3 days passed in a haze of preparation and memories I had spent years trying to forget. I found myself standing in front of my closet, staring at the few decent dresses I own, wondering what one wore to face the family that had cast you out. Nothing seemed appropriate for a reunion built on the foundation of a dead man's final manipulation. I had left Charleston 10 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back, a black eye that makeup couldn't quite hide, and a 3-month-old baby in my arms. My husband David had been charming enough when we dated, but marriage had revealed a different side of him. The first time he hit me, I made excuses. The second time, I planned my escape. By the third time, I was gone. But instead of finding support from my family, I had walked into an ambush. My siblings Lindsay and Mark had been waiting with their poisonous words, ready to paint me as a liar and a troublemaker. They had convinced my father that I was making up stories about David, that I was simply looking for an easy way out of my marriage to come running home for financial support. You always were dramatic, Rachel, Lindsay had said, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany table in our father's study. David called us. He's worried sick about you and the baby. He says you've been acting erratically since the birth. Postpartum depression, maybe? Mark had nodded along, his face wearing that self-satisfied expression I remembered from childhood. Dad, she's always been the one to cause trouble. Remember high school? Remember college? Now she's trying to destroy a good man's reputation because she can't handle being a wife and mother. I had tried to show them the bruises, but they claimed I could have gotten them anywhere. I had begged my father to believe me, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted and carefully watered by my siblings' lies. I think it's best if you go back to your husband, my father had said finally, his voice tired and uncertain. Work things out. Marriage is a commitment, Rachel. You can't just run away when things get difficult. When I refused, when I told them I would rather live on the streets than go back to David, they had made their choice. I was cut off, disinherited in all but the legal sense, and made to understand that I was no longer welcome in the Moore family. Now, 10 years later, I was driving back to Charleston with my son beside me, both of us dressed in our best clothes, heading toward a confrontation I had never wanted to have. The funeral was held at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, the same church where I had been baptized, confirmed, and married. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through doors I hadn't entered in a decade, feeling the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. Caleb stayed close to my side, his small hand occasionally reaching for mine when the crowd became too overwhelming. He had insisted on wearing his only suit, a navy blue outfit I had bought him for his school's awards ceremony. Looking at him, so serious and handsome, I felt a surge of fierce pride. Whatever else had happened in my life, I had raised this incredible human being. The church was packed. My father had been a prominent businessman in Charleston, and it seemed like half the city had come to pay their respects. I recognized many faces from my childhood, people who had known me when I was William Moore's youngest daughter, before I became the family scandal. We took seats in the back, hoping to avoid attention, but I should have known better. Within minutes, I spotted Lindsay making her way through the crowd, her black dress obviously expensive, her blonde hair styled to perfection. She had always been beautiful, but there was something cold about her now, something calculated in the way she moved. She approached our pew with purpose, carrying a glass of red wine that seemed out of place in the church setting. As she drew near, her foot seemed to catch on nothing, and the wine splashed across the front of my simple gray dress. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby mourners to hear. "I'm so clumsy. But then again, I suppose that cheap dress won't be much of a loss. You probably shouldn't have come to places where you don't belong anyway." The old Rachel might have shrunk back, might have apologized for being in the way, but 10 years of raising a child alone, of fighting for every opportunity, of building a life from nothing had changed me. I calmly reached for a tissue from my purse and began dabbing at the stain. "Thank you for showing me that you haven't changed at all, Lindsay," I said quietly, meeting her eyes directly. "It's good to know where I stand." Her perfect composure slipped for just a moment, surprise flickering across her features. She had expected the old Rachel, the one who could be bullied and shamed into retreat. Before she could respond, Mark appeared at her side. He had put on weight over the years, and success in business hadn't softened the cruel edge that had always defined him. Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You've got some nerve showing up here after what you put this family through. I want you gone the minute this service is over. Don't even think about coming to the house." I stood up slowly, and I realized that I was now the same height as my brother. Somehow, that small fact gave me confidence. "I'm here because I was asked to be here, Mark. Nothing more, nothing less." His face flushed red. "Asked? By who? Nobody in this family wants you here. Maybe you should ask Mr. Dawson about that," I replied, nodding toward the distinguished older man in the front row who had been watching our exchange with interest. Mark's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the organ began playing and everyone returned to their seats. The service passed in a blur of hymns and eulogies that painted my father as a pillar of the community, a devoted family man, a generous philanthropist. I listened to speech after speech from people who talked about his kindness and wisdom, and I wondered if they were describing the same man who had turned his back on his own daughter. When it was over, Caleb and I made our way toward the exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But Mr. Dawson intercepted us in the vestibule. "Miss Moore, I'm Thomas Dawson." We spoke on the phone. He was a tall, silver-haired man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Something about his presence was reassuring, like he was someone who could be trusted to keep his word. "Mr. Dawson, thank you for the call. I have to say, I'm not sure what I'm doing here." "You're here because your father had some things he needed to say, and some wrongs he needed to make right. I hope you'll join us at the house for the reading of the will." I glanced around the emptying church, noting the hostile looks from various family friends and relatives. "I don't think I'm exactly welcome there. Miss Moore, your father's will is very specific about who needs to be present. You and your son are not just welcome, you're required to be there. Anyone who has a problem with that will need to take it up with the South Carolina probate court." There was something in his tone that made me believe him, something that suggested he knew more about the situation than he was letting on. The drive to my childhood home was surreal. Caleb pressed his face to the window, taking in the grand houses and manicured lawns of the historic district. When we pulled up to the Moore family mansion, his eyes went wide. "Mom, did you really grow up here?" I looked up at the 3-story antebellum house with its white columns and wraparound porches, its perfectly maintained gardens and circular driveway. It looked exactly the same as it had when I left, like a museum piece frozen in time. "Yes, sweetheart, I did. It's like a castle. Sometimes castles can be prisons too, I murmured, but he was too excited to hear me. We walked up the front steps together, and I felt like I was moving through a dream. How many times had I run up these same steps as a child, eager to tell my father about my day at school? How many times had I sat on this porch swing, reading books and planning my future? Before we could ring the bell, the door swung open to reveal Richard, Lindsay's husband. He was a man who had married into money and never let anyone forget it, treating my father's wealth as if it were his own inheritance. Security, he called over his shoulder. We have trespassers on the property. Please escort these people off the premises immediately. Two large men in suits appeared behind him, moving toward us with purpose. I instinctively stepped in front of Caleb, my heart racing. This was exactly what I had been afraid of, the humiliation I had dreaded. But before the security guards could reach us, Thomas Dawson appeared in the doorway. Stop right there, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone freeze. Miss Moore is not only invited, she is the guest of honor at today's proceedings. If anyone lays a hand on her or her son, they will be arrested for assault and for interfering with the execution of a legal document. Now, I suggest we all move into the living room so we can get this over with. Richard's face went white, then red, then white again. The security guards looked confused, unsure of whose orders to follow. There must be some mistake, Richard stammered. She's not in the will. She was disinherited years ago. Actually, sir, you are the one who is mistaken. Now, shall we proceed, or would you prefer to explain to the probate court why you attempted to prevent the legal execution of Mr. Moore's final wishes? We filed into the living room like actors taking our places for the final scene of a play. I remembered this room so clearly from my childhood, with its heavy furniture and oil paintings of long-dead Moore ancestors. Lindsay and Mark sat together on the sofa, Richard hovering behind them like a protective shadow. Other relatives and family friends filled the remaining chairs, all of them shooting curious glances in my direction. Caleb and I took seats near the back, and I tried to calm my racing heart. Whatever was about to happen, I knew it was going to change everything. Mr. Dawson moved to the front of the room and placed a briefcase on the coffee table. From it, he withdrew a laptop computer and several thick folders. Before we begin with the formal reading of the will, he announced, Mr. Moore requested that I share a video message he recorded shortly before his death. The room fell silent as he opened the laptop and turned it toward the assembled group. My father's face appeared on the screen, and I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from gasping. He looked so much older than I remembered, so frail and tired. But his eyes still held that familiar intensity, the steel that had made him a successful businessman. If you are watching this, his voice said through the speakers, then I am dead, and you are here for the reading of my will. I want to begin by saying that I have made many mistakes in my life, but the greatest of them was allowing myself to be poisoned against my youngest daughter, Rachel. I felt the blood drain from my face. Around the room, I could hear shifting and murmuring, but my father's voice continued, steady and clear. I was a fool, blinded by the lies and manipulations of my other children. Mark and Lindsay painted a picture of Rachel as a troublemaker, a liar, someone who couldn't be trusted. And in my weakness, I believed them. I believed them when they said she was making up stories about her husband's abuse. I believed them when they said she was only coming home to take advantage of the family's money. Lindsay shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You can't let him. Sit down, Mr. Dawson said firmly. You will have your chance to speak when the video is finished. She reluctantly sank back into her seat, but I could see her hands shaking with rage. My father's voice continued from the laptop. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, doesn't it? Gerald, my longtime accountant, showed me the letters, Rachel. The letters you sent every year on my birthday, with photographs of your son and updates about your life. Letters I never saw because they were intercepted and hidden from me. I felt tears starting to fall, but I couldn't look away from the screen. I had written those letters faithfully for 8 years, never knowing if he received them, never expecting a response. I had finally stopped 2 years ago, telling myself it was time to let go of false hope. He also showed me the money orders, my dear daughter. Every month for 10 years, you sent $50 to help with my medical expenses. $50 that I know you could barely spare, taken from the grocery money you needed to feed your son. While my other children were draining my accounts for their own purposes, the daughter I had cast out was the only one trying to take care of me. The room was dead silent now. I could feel eyes boring into me from every direction, but I kept my focus on my father's face on the screen. I hired a private investigator to look into your claims about David. It didn't take long to find the police reports, the hospital records, the restraining order you filed after you left Charleston. You were telling the truth, Rachel. You were telling the truth, and I failed you when you needed me most. I was crying openly now, years of hurt and anger and grief pouring out of me. Caleb reached over and took my hand, squeezing it tight. I cannot undo the damage I have done, my father continued. I cannot give you back the 10 years of family support you deserved, but I can try to make amends in the only way I have left. What you are about to hear is my attempt to balance the scales of justice. The video ended, and Mr. Dawson closed the laptop. He then opened the first folder and withdrew several documents. I will now read the last will and testament of William James Moore, he announced formally. The next few minutes were a masterclass in legal revenge. My father had clearly spent considerable time planning his final message to the family that had manipulated him. To my son Mark, who has borrowed over $200,000 from the company accounts for his failed business ventures, I leave my broken compass, in the hope that he might find his moral direction. Mark's face went purple. That's impossible. There's no proof of any. Actually, sir, there is extensive documentation, Mr. Dawson interrupted, pulling out another folder. Your father hired forensic accountants to audit all family financial transactions. We have detailed records of every unauthorized withdrawal. He continued reading. To my daughter Lindsay, who has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of family money on frivolous purchases to maintain a false social status, I leave my mother's Bible, with the hope that she might learn about truth and humility. Lindsay was shaking her head frantically. Dad was confused at the end. He had dementia. This will isn't valid. Mrs. Patterson, your father was evaluated by 3 different psychiatrists in the months before his death. All of them certified that he was of sound mind and fully competent to make these decisions. Mr. Dawson paused and looked directly at me before continuing. And finally, to my beloved daughter Rachel, whom I wronged so terribly, and to my grandson Caleb, whom I never had the chance to know, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the family home, my shares in Moore Enterprises, and all remaining investments and assets, with a total estimated value of $15 million. The room erupted. Lindsay screamed and threw herself toward the coffee table, trying to grab the documents. Mark was shouting about fraud and illegal manipulation. Richard was demanding to see identification and proof of authorization. But Mr. Dawson was not finished. He pulled out yet another folder, this one even thicker than the others. In addition to the inheritance, he said, raising his voice above the chaos, Mr. Moore has left detailed documentation of financial crimes committed by both Mark and Lindsay over the past decade. Rachel, as the primary beneficiary of the estate, it is now your decision whether to pursue criminal charges or handle these matters privately. The shouting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Mark and Lindsay both went very still, the color draining from their faces. You can't be serious, Lindsay whispered. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking but my voice steady. Mr. Dawson, I need to ask you something. All those letters I sent, did my father ever actually see them? Yes, Miss Moore. I was instructed to give them to him personally starting about 3 years ago, when he began to suspect that his mail was being intercepted. He read every single one. He kept them in his bedside table and looked through them every night before he went to sleep. The tears came harder then, a decade of grief and longing and regret washing over me. My father had known. In the end, he had known the truth about everything. Mark suddenly lunged forward, making a grab for the folder containing the evidence of his financial crimes. But 2 police officers stepped into the room, and I realized they had been waiting just outside the door. Mr. Moore, one of them said calmly, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. As they handcuffed my brother, Lindsay collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. Richard tried to approach me, his voice taking on a wheedling, desperate tone. Rachel, listen, we're all family here. This has gotten out of hand. We can work something out, can't we? Let's not let this destroy the family. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had just tried to have me thrown off the property, who had spent 10 years treating my father's money as his own personal bank account. Mr. Patterson, I said quietly, you were never part of this family. And as for working something out, that chance ended 10 years ago when you all chose to believe lies instead of protecting someone you claimed to love. I turned to Mr. Dawson. Please proceed with the criminal charges. All of them. Lindsay wailed and threw herself at my feet, clutching at my skirt. Please, Rachel. I'm sorry, we were wrong. Don't do this to your own sister. I looked down at her, this woman who had helped destroy my relationship with my father, who had intercepted my letters and stolen my attempts to reconcile. She looked pathetic now, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, her designer dress wrinkled and stained. Lindsay, I said gently, you stopped being my sister the day you chose money and status over truth and family. I hope you find what you're really looking for someday, but it won't be at my expense anymore. The police led Mark away in handcuffs while Lindsay was helped to a chair by one of the remaining relatives. Richard stood in the corner, talking frantically on his phone, probably to his lawyer. Mr. Dawson gathered up his papers and approached Caleb and me. Miss Moore, I know this has been overwhelming. When you're ready, I'd like to sit down with you and go over the details of your inheritance. There are decisions to be made about the business, the properties, and various investments. I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. Mr. Dawson, can I ask you something? How long did my father know the truth? He started having doubts about 3 years ago when he noticed discrepancies in the company books. The investigation into your siblings' activities led him to realize that if they were lying about money, they might be lying about other things too. He hired someone to find you, and when he learned about the letters being intercepted, he put the pieces together pretty quickly. Why didn't he contact me directly? Mr. Dawson smiled sadly. He wanted to, Miss Moore, but he felt he had hurt you too badly, that you would never forgive him. He thought the only way he could make amends was through his will, by giving you everything he should have given you when you needed it most. I felt Caleb tugging on my hand and looked down at him. His eyes were wide with all the drama he had witnessed, but he seemed more curious than frightened. Mom, does this mean we're rich now? Despite everything, I laughed. Yes, sweetheart, I think it does. Does this mean we don't have to worry about money anymore? No, baby, we don't have to worry about money anymore. He considered this seriously. Good, now you can buy yourself some new clothes that don't have wine stains on them. The house had mostly emptied out by now, the various relatives and friends drifting away in clusters, whispering and speculating about what they had witnessed. Mr. Dawson finished packing up his materials and handed me his business card. Miss Moore, take some time to process all of this. When you're ready, call me and we'll start working through the details. In the meantime, the house is yours. The staff has been instructed to maintain it until you decide what you want to do. After he left, Caleb and I found ourselves alone in the grand living room where I had spent so many hours as a child. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photograph of my parents from their wedding day. They looked so young and happy, so full of hope for the future. Mom? Caleb said softly, "Are you okay?" I turned to find him watching me with concern, this 10-year-old boy who had just inherited more money than he could possibly understand, but who was worried about his mother's feelings. You know what, sweetheart? I think I'm going to be better than okay. 6 months later, Caleb and I were living in the house full-time. I had decided not to sell it, but instead to transform it into something new, something that reflected who we were rather than who the Moore family had been. The criminal cases against Mark and Lindsay had proceeded swiftly. Mark was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement. Lindsay and Richard's marriage had collapsed under the financial strain and social scandal, and they had been forced to sell their own home to pay legal fees. Lindsay now lived in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dental office. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a kind of sad closure. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. The business was thriving under new management. I had discovered that I had inherited not just my father's money, but also his instinct for sound investments. Working with financial advisors and business managers, I was learning to navigate the world of corporate ownership and philanthropy. But the most meaningful change was the William Moore Foundation, which I had established to help victims of domestic violence and their children. We provided emergency housing, legal assistance, counseling services, and job training. Every month, we helped dozens of women and children escape dangerous situations and build new lives. On this particular Saturday morning, I was in the garden with Caleb, planting flowers in the beds that had once been my mother's pride and joy. He was telling me about his new school, about the friends he had made and the teachers who challenged him. "Mom," he said, carefully patting soil around a rosebush, "do you think Grandpa would be proud of what we're doing?" I paused in my digging and looked up at the house, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Through the windows, I could see the comfortable furniture we had chosen together, the family photographs that included both of us, the books and games and signs of real life. "I think he would be, sweetheart," I hoped he would be. A car pulled into the driveway, and I recognized Sarah Martinez, the director of our foundation. She had been one of the first women we had helped, a single mother who had escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but her 3 children and a determination to build a better life. Now she ran our programs with passion and expertise, helping other women find their own paths to freedom. Rachel, she called, getting out of the car with a big smile. I have wonderful news. The state just approved our application for the new shelter. We'll be able to help 50 more families this year. I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what my father's money was meant for, not status symbols or social climbing, but real change in real people's lives. Caleb ran over to Sarah, eager to hear about the new families we would be helping. As I watched them talk, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. 10 years ago, I had left this house as a victim, scared and alone and convinced that I was worthless. Today, I was returning as something else entirely, a survivor, a mother, a force for positive change in the world. The old Rachel had spent years trying to earn love and approval from people who were incapable of giving it. The new Rachel had learned to find worth in herself and in the love she shared with her son. She had learned that the best revenge against those who hurt you is not to hurt them back, but to build something beautiful from the ashes of their destruction. That evening, as Caleb and I sat on the front porch watching the sunset, he leaned against my shoulder and sighed contentedly. Mom, I like living here. I'm glad, baby. I like it too. Do you think we'll stay forever? I looked out over the grounds where I had played as a child, where I had dreamed of my future, where I had been broken and cast out, and where I had finally found my way home again. I think we'll stay as long as it feels right, I said. This is our house now, our family, our story. We get to decide how it ends. He was quiet for a moment, processing this in the way that children do, taking big concepts and making them fit into their understanding of the world. I think it should end happily, he said finally. I hugged him close, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, feeling the solid warmth of his small body against mine. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the city coming alive for the evening, people heading home to their own families, their own stories, their own chances for happiness. I think it already has, sweetheart, I whispered. I think it already has.